Business schools are amongst the most coveted higher educational institutions. Students go through some of the most competitive exams and pay significant fees, and many of them give up significant potential earnings because they hope that at the end of their degree, they will get an MBA and they'll get a great job. Yet, the onerous process of finding, soliciting, and bringing dozens of companies to campuses each year to hire students falls mostly on final year students who are part of the elected or selected placement committees, often also called placecoms. For as long as we can remember, and I'm an MBA too, a few decades back, these committees have always been accused of bias. It happened during my time. I graduated in 2001. Arrogance and power play by other students, rightly and wrongly. Yet, the fact also remains that those who serve on the placement committees often and almost always sacrifice a significant part of their own education and classes and grades and GPAs in order to run a great job matching process for their entire batch. Should they, though? And our guest is Professor Varun Nagraj, who's the Dean and Professor of Information Management and Analytics at the SPJ Institute of Management Research, which is often called SPJIMR in Mumbai. He holds a PhD in management from the Case Western Reserve University's Weatherhood School of Management. He also holds an MBA from Boston University and an MS in computer engineering from North Carolina State University and a BTech in electrical engineering from IIT Bombay. He's also had a career spanning over 3 decades in digital products that reflects his passion for product management, development, and innovation. Welcome to 2 by 2 Professor Nagraj.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm really excited to be here, especially discussing the very important topic that you've laid out.
Thank you. And of course, my other guest is also my other co-host, Praveen Gopalkrishnan, also incidentally an MBA. Welcome, Praveen.
Thank you, Rohin. Let me just say that not much has changed from the time that you graduated, which we know was a long time ago, to the time that I graduated, which is very recently. So all the distrust and the anger and the passions that arise inside campuses towards Placecom is something that I've seen in very close quarters, and we'll talk about that as well.
All right. 3 MBAs get onto a call to discuss how placements should be done. Great conversation ahead. If B schools didn't exist and we invented B schools today, would we end up at a system where we said, hey, you students in the second year, why don't you figure out how to get jobs for everyone in your batch? Professor Nagraj, I think I often find this question as a very powerful way of challenging things that are done the way they are done because we never question them, right? But if you just kind of often ask ourselves, if this was invented today, would we do it like this? Would we, Professor?
No, we would not. In fact, honestly, I was very surprised when I came back from the US to India 3 years ago to take up this position at SPJMR, that this is how placements were done. I had been out of the country for 30 years. And certainly this was not how things were done at IIT Bombay, back in the day, back in 1986. So obviously these are all, new trends that happened over the last 30 years that I was blissfully unaware of. And so I must say it was actually quite a very big surprise to me that this is how placements, or what one might call career services, are delivered in business schools and I guess other institutions in India as well.
How did we shift then?
So in terms of when the transition happened, certainly, I was remembering the Stone Ages when it wasn't so, right? So sometime after 1986, I'm assuming even in engineering colleges, students got involved. And I just don't know when that particular switch happened. And in terms of MBA institutions, I actually, I had friends obviously that, that went to IIM A, B, and C and such in 86 through 88. I don't know, actually, I'll have to ask one of them what their placement processes were like in the 87, 88 timeframe, and whether it was student run at that time or not. Now, regardless of what used to be, the fact is it is primarily a student run
Sorry,
process.
Professor, I'd like to interrupt you here, and I'd like to propose another hypothetical question. We started by saying that what if a B school were invented today, of course we kind of sort of all agree that B schools would run. Now let's stick with that hypothesis, right? Now let's say 10 years have passed from today and all B schools are running the process themselves, and in comes this iconoclastic new B school that says, you know what, I don't think this makes sense. We should let students run placement process. So my question to you would be, what might be the reason for a new B school to come and say it's better for students to run placement process? If we had
I
to think
actually,
of it from first
fair,
principles.
fair enough. I think that's a very nice way of framing it. I would actually struggle to come up with reasons that I believe in. Being a former debater, I'm sure I could come up with three reasons, such as it helps a group of students, to discover themselves and they own their own results, etc. But if you really ask me what I believe in, I don't think there would actually be a good reason, to justify 10 years from now that student-run placements are the way we should, be doing things. I think a good example would actually be the ISB, the Indian School of Business, which is amongst the more recent business schools that is set up, where it is a totally professionally run placement process. And of course, the argument provided there is that, hey, it's a 1 year process, and within a 1 year process, there really is no time, to do a lot of the things that placement committees do, which is handover from 1 year to the other and so forth, right? But that said, ISB provides a very good example of essentially the institution taking responsibility for a key output metric and delivering on that. So it has been done. It is, and for many years now at ISB, I think quite well. And so I don't think it's as surprising, an idea that even 2 year schools, should not consider.
And of course, ISB has introduced a 2-year program as well now, if I'm not mistaken, right?
That's right.
So Praveen,
And
can you think of some
they would
reasons?
leverage. I would assume they would leverage their existing, professional setup for the 2 year program as well.
Of course.
I'll add some nuance to this, to the following, because Professor, you also said that I'm not sure when engineering colleges started to transition into this, maybe in the 90s and in the 2000s. I'm not sure how B schools got into this. So I'll add some color here. So I think we have been talking about it in a duality. We have been saying that either it's student run or it's professionally run. In my experience, it's actually a spectrum, in the sense that certain institutions have a certain degree of involvement from the institution side and a certain degree of involvement from the student side. On one end of the spectrum is, I went to engineering college and I graduated somewhere in like 2005. So that period between 2001 to 5, which is just coincides with the rise of all of these service tech companies that start to hire from engineering colleges in such a big way. At that time, you had a student placement committee. It was, if I remember correctly, it wasn't an elected body. It was essentially a selected body. And mostly all of the work that they did was fairly operational, for the lack of a better word. It would be about contacting recruiters, scheduling them, making sure that they come into campus. But the institute themselves took immense amount of responsibility and ownership to make sure that the process worked out. So I don't remember being in engineering college, as an example, and being, quote unquote, fearful or resentful of the placement committee, wondering, do they have my best interests at heart? I
Perhaps
never
because it
saw
didn't
it
have
that way.
that power, right?
It didn't have that power, exactly, right? And so the story of people who have done placements in engineering college at that time is, all they'll tell you is that it was just a blur. They took responsibility to place students, but it was mostly around scheduling, etc. And it was that. Now that radically changes when I went to B school. And when I went to B school between the years of 2009 and 11, which of course coincides just after the financial recession that hits US and placements, everything is down. So now what happens is, in this case, the power changes, where in this institute now, the students have much more power. There is an involvement from the institute side. There is a representative on the administration side. But I think it's fair to say that the students were the ones who basically drove most of the process. They are the ones who were right in front. They were the ones who were setting the rules. And quite frankly, they were the ones who were not very nice. So there was a certain very clear power imbalance that I experienced. Now, there are ways that students did in order to shift this. So, for instance, one of the things that they did was, if your placements are happening for your batch, it's not your batchmates who are conducting placements. It's actually your juniors who are doing it. So if it is your first years who are doing summers, it's the second years who are managing the process. And when the second years are doing the finals, it is the first year placement committee that steps up and does the process for them. So there is a little bit of, some amount of arm's length that's happening.
If you'd like to listen to the full episode, you can head over right now to the Ken and become a premium subscriber to catch up on everything else that we've discussed. Your premium subscription will also get you access to all of our long form stories, newsletters, visual stories, and all the other podcasts that we produce. Or if you want to just sample full episodes of 2x2, you can do that by becoming a premium subscriber on Apple Podcasts at a really great monthly price. Lastly, if you enjoyed listening to this episode, let us know by rating the podcast on your favorite podcast streaming platform. Thank you for listening, and we'll be back next week with another exciting episode.